Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here with JollyCrocodile, and we're going to be having a pretty lighthearted chat about religion. And most of the time on the internet, I end up talking to either atheists, like hardcore fedora tippers, or Christian theists. I don't really get a chance to talk to anyone else. And I think that me and Croc see eye to eye on a lot of things. We're on kind of the same wavelength, so we're just going to sit back and kind of talk about religion. Well, what's going on, Croc? How you doing?
All right. Oh, I'm pretty good. I've basically had a vacation for the last couple days, so I've really just been hanging out and wasting my time, So feeling good. How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. I've been getting a lot of work in recently, so trying to get my life in order, as we all kind of do. But
Hero working, but I have bought a gun yesterday, so
oh,
I'm starting that, and I'm I guess I'm beginning to put into a lot of my plans. I'm beginning to put them into motion. That's what I'm trying to say. So the gun thing, that's something I've wanted for like a year, and finally, since I've been getting into the trades now, I have enough money to actually put into an investment like that.
well, there you go. Yeah, that's a good sign for everyone out there who doesn't know. Getting your life together is one of the most important things you can do. So I think we all have little things like that we can keep up with. But today's topic is really going to be some form of religion. And when it comes to religion, where do you see yourself on the spectrum? The autism spectrum. No, just kidding.
Well, on the religion autism spectrum, I go pretty far because I guess I'm one of those guys that believes like the more serious you take your religion, the better. I know that wasn't a serious question, but I have so much autism, I'm going to answer it seriously.
No,
But
no, go ahead.
the thing is like when I was a kid, and we're probably going to get into this later on in the talk, but when I was a kid, even like early age, like 12 or whatever, I didn't really identify as a Christian. I mean, still in middle school, I apparently my mom tells me I was very religious when I was young, church, and then around in middle school, I kind of got out of Christianity, and I just stopped kind of believing in it. But I always thought somewhat recently, maybe like middle of high school, um, I always thought that the serious churches, like the fire and brimstone churches, were places I want to go to. Churches with Latin mass, and they preach like very serious, things. Those churches are the ones I would prefer to go to, as in the kind of weird hippie Christian churches where they do those like rock songs, the
Yeah,
Christian
the,
rock.
the the New Age Protestant Reformed churches. That's the same. I was kind of raised in the same place as a Methodist, and it's all incredibly boring. Like it. There's no real discussions going on there. It's the same kind of hippy dippy Jesus shit that we always hear. Oh, Jesus was such a nice guy and he fed the homeless and he cured the sick. It's like, no, I want to hear about the stories where Jesus, drove the merchants out of the temple with a whip. That's what I want to hear about. I want to hear about the I was particularly interested in Sunday school about the religious wars that went on for Christianity. I mean, we only briefly touched on things like that, but that was where my interest really lied. But yeah, it's sort of on a similar story to you. By the time I got into middle school, I mean, we weren't really going to church. I didn't really believe. If anything, I would have called myself a deist at the time, but it wasn't a prominent thing in my life. It was at the time it was video games and getting interested in girls. So that was about it.
Oh, I mean, I remember when I was in like the Bible studies or whatever, the most interesting part of the Bible to me was Revelation. I mean, I just ignore what the guy was saying and read parts of Revelation a lot of the times, because I don't know. I guess it was just the finality of it. It was like this is like where everything is headed. This is the important part.
Right.
So I guess I've maybe I take Christianity more seriously than most Christians, but it's like to me, I've always be like a serious thing in society, and it kind of like I guess I would describe myself as a theocrat, even though really practically, I can't really be a practical pagan theocrat, but like I believe society should incorporate religion into almost everything, kind of like in antiquity. basically every public festival would be religious, like these, everything would be devoted to the gods. I believe Julius Evola has a quote: "Elevate action to the level of ritual," and it's like
Right.
basically transforming your whole life into a ritual, religious kind of act, and that's what I believe. Like
Yeah,
everything should have a higher meaning.
just like Commander Rockwell said, if you're going to do something, be a fanatic about it. If you're going to be a doctor, be a fanatical doctor. You got to have some spirit behind it. These your actions kind of have to transcend the mundane. Lots of people are looking for that in their lives too.
This is like, even, I'm in the trades and I'm an electrician, and a lot of times I just don't want to fucking go to work, but I'll remind myself that it's kind of a religious thing to go to work. It's like it's by working, or by a soldier, following his duty, whatever, by a mother being a mother, father being a father. It's like you're doing a sacred act. It's You're following like the part that the gods, that the universe wants you to play. You're
Well,
fulfilling your role.
it's virtuous. That's how I see it. I see certain actions as being virtuous, and it kind of stems from the Aristotelian virtue ethics. But that's another discussion for another time. So, if someone were to come up to you and ask you, "What is your religion?" What would you say? Would you say, "Oh, I'm agnostic or Christian," or is there a label that you could put on it?
I mean, I just call myself pagan. Like, if some random person came up to me and it was a normie, I probably I probably even want to say, I just say, "Well, I'm very religious," and let them make their own assumptions. But if I was in the conversation, and I wanted to get serious with it, I'd call myself just a pagan.
Right. Now, what happens if this normie like kind of pressure you to say, "Oh, you're religious. Well, what church do you go to?" What would you say?
Really pressuring me, I'd say,
Fuck off.
I would probably no, I'd probably say, "Well, I'm kind of like," or something like that. I'd kind of describe it in that way, because Hinduism is kind of a sect of what I believe in. But so I'd probably just
Indo-Aryan.
say yeah, Indo-Aryan, you're pagan. But yeah, I'd probably just say, "Oh, I'm a pagan, like the Hindus," right? So I'd just describe it that
Ah.
way.
Okay, so in terms of paganism, would you say that you see yourself as a, what's the term? Not trans pagan, but someone who doesn't really follow one particular sect of an ancient religion. You're more about all the different types of Indo-European religions.
It's not that I don't follow one particular one, but it's just that, like, I try to combine all of them together to get like a greater truth. But I'll celebrate holidays from this one. I mean, it's ultimately. I mean, we could get into the specifics of it, but there are gods throughout all of these European pantheons, also the Persian pantheon. Some of them, they all share the same root, and it's, to anyone listening who doubts that, it's a linguistic thing. There are gods like Neptune, or the Sky Father, which would be like Zeus or Tyr. There's just gods that share the same linguistic root, and they
Yeah,
reappear often with the same roles
Perquinos,
across.
Thor, Wotan, all of those. All of the Indo-European religions. There's a if you're not familiar with this concept, there's a group of people called the Proto-Indo-Europeans, who basically were, I believe, they were in the area of like northern Syria and Iran and the Caucasus, and they're the ones who, it's like 80,000 years ago, were the ones who ended up mating with Neanderthals in the region, and their offspring were super successful, this Neanderthal proto-human hybrid, and then that hybrid kind of went out and spread out to become what we know as East Asians, North Indians, and Europeans. And so they all shared a similar linguistic group, which is why the roots of many languages stem from that. But they also had a very similar sect of ideas, like sort of the same gods evolved over time from that region.
Yeah, that's kind of it. So that's kind of what I'm about. Is you can better know the truth of, I guess, reality, the metaphysical truth of things, through observing, like, uh, all these pagan religions and the myths that they have.
Okay, so it's there's not one particular, I guess, book or teacher that you would follow. There's not some set of rituals. It's kind of all over the place.
Um, so to the audience listening, when you hear the word pagan, um, I'm using it in a specific context, as in the Proto-Indo-European, Aryan, whatever you want to call it, pagan. So that means there are certain gods I believe are true on some level, and that would be, the gods who reappear consistently, or they just have a very they're like archetypes, or they just have a very
You take the
strong correlation.
you take the Peterson approach, the archetypal hero approach, the Jungian approach.
Well, it's not atheistic. I mean, I believe the gods do exist in some way. It doesn't. They don't necessarily have to exist physically, but they are like actual beings. So
Okay,
it's
so
it's not like
would you see them in, and I'll compare it to what I know. Would you compare it to, let's see, if I were to say that, let's say for example, Thor is a literal physical divine being, would you say that that's closer to what you believe, or would you say that the character archetype of Thor is alive in human beings in the physical sense? Because there's a
um
differentiation between the divine and the non-divine. I think the supernatural and the natural.
of Thor is present in some humans, but how I would describe it is the gods and like the physical universe is very close to humans and the soul. All right, so the gods are basically like the souls to the physical universe. So, okay, so I come from my soul. Like my soul is made up of my essential qualities, right? The necessary things that I am dependent on come from my soul. The soul is like my perfect self almost. It exists without my soul. And the physical body is just an extension. It kind of comes from the soul like heat comes
It's a
from a
vessel for
flame.
the soul. Is that right?
I wouldn't say the body is a vessel for the soul because the soul is eternal and has always existed, and the body is like temporal.
That's what I mean.
Like
It's
this,
a vessel. You have this eternal soul that just gets put like in a container, basically, for a short amount of time, and then of course the reincarnation story. One soul keeps going into different vessels.
I wouldn't say. I mean, the vessel implies it's like trapped somewhere. I mean, the thing is like I wouldn't describe it as that. I would just say like my body is. It's the same way as saying like heat from or light from a flame. It's like it's kind of like an emanation of the soul. But anyways, like this is kind of how I view the gods. Is like so you have literal, actual physical things that come from the gods.
Hmm.
I believe that there's like in the strictest sense, I'm a monotheist because I believe everything has one absolute source. That's kind of this super conscious, all pervasive primal substance, which would be kind of like the deist god, which is like it's present everywhere, and even the gods come, or they're just closer to the source, but the gods still come from the source. So, in like the strictest possible sense, I'm a monotheist, but I believe the gods are their effects can be seen in the physical world. I don't think they're present like humans, like they don't take human form and walk around as humans, but um, when you see like lightning or fire or whatever, like the forces of the universe, these things come from the gods.
Oh,
That's
okay,
that's what I
okay.
like. Divinity can be observed in the physical universe. Nature is kind of a divine thing, and so when you're seeing like these physical things play out, these are just greater forces that I characterize as gods.
Oh, okay. So it really is like how humans used to characterize nature as each action as being either representation of or an effect of a specific deity.
Yeah. Now the gods, like I said, they can exist, but it's not the myth is different from the truth here. So you can have a book that says the myths of the gods, and this only serves to give them more character. Who knows? It could have been divinely inspired. Anything, could happen. But a god's existence, like Thor, doesn't have to actually physically walk around in the woods and beat giants for me to believe that Thor is real.
I
I
don't know,
believe the
man.
gods are.
He promised to kill all the ice giants, and I don't see any ice giants walking around. So, kind of got to
That
go on
is
that.
that is proof that Thor is probably real. But the other thing is that when you're thinking of the gods, these things come from a higher realm, which I would say like the world of consciousness, right? So these things are it's almost like the gods they come from a higher realm, but they can be manifested inside you. it's a Hindu. What I'm prescribing here is a belief that the Hindus believe in. It's like
Right.
things don't have to be physically real for them to be true. So the gods exist, they just exist in a different way than saying like, well, Jesus exists. And this is a criticism that Christians will level at pagans of saying like, oh, do you literally believe that, Thor literally was around with his hammer and, the universe was, the first god had to be licked out of the ice by a giant cow. And I'll ask the same thing back to Christians. It's like, well, do you literally believe that, the world was created in 7 days and Jesus, did all this? And I mean, the thing is, when you get into having to defend on like historical events or provable people or something that has to actually occur the way it says, in this very dogmatic sense, you get into this thing that takes away from like the higher meaning of religion. It's like breaking religion down to a
Yeah.
very simple level. And this is why we have this idea of like the old bearded guy on the mountain is like the modern god, or like the giant hand that comes from the sky. And this is not a pagan thing, even though Christians will make fun of pagans about this. It's like, oh, you just a really big human. And it's like, well, that actually, this whole concept of the hand coming from the sky, or like God just being a big guy with, you know, a white beard, is like, that's something that is made fun of in a Christian context. Like, I think of shows like Family
Well,
Guy where
that
God is,
that idea of there being sort of this man in the sky with a beard, that's actually a pagan concept that the early Christians took and used in order to convert the pagans in Europe. They saw this Odinist archetype and used it to describe their god in order to convert people. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the conversion of Europe that happened well over 1,000 years ago, but they did many things like that. Of course, the reconverting of festivals as well, like Christmas and Easter and things like that. Those are all pagan traditions that
yeah.
they co-opted in order to convert people. So go ahead.
But what I'm saying is like this thing of taking something so literally. Well, I'm not sure if this all of this what I'm saying would have come from the pagan ones, because the root of it comes from Christians saying like God has to be a physical being, and what the myths say has to have literally happened for what we're saying to be real. I mean, it's saying like, oh, Jesus had to have resurrected in 3 days, or he had to have died on the cross for this to be real.
Well, it's interesting that
And what I'm
not.
saying is like,
Sorry, go ahead.
take a myth or something religious, which is supposed to have a higher meaning, and force it into something that is literal and that only has like one possible interpretation of like, Jesus's story can't be related to everybody. Jesus's story is only Jesus because it only applies to him. It's not like this, allegory for everyone's lives. It's like what Christians are saying, they're not saying that like all of us are Jesus and when you all struggle to bear the cross. They're saying like, no, Jesus is the only one who actually bore the cross. And it's like a very exoteric way of interpreting things. Because I
Right.
think these pagan myths are meant to be malleable and change based on the culture to be more relatable. And I guess what I'm saying here is like, it's the making the myth so literal that has caused Christianity to basically weaken.
And by weaken, how do you see Christianity as it is now? Do you think it's in a weakened state?
When it comes to Christianity in the West, I think it's on its deathbed. I mean, it's been on its deathbed for a while. Like, I remember Hitler considered Christianity on its deathbed in Nazi Germany. It's like, uh, Nietzsche considered it pretty much dead. I mean, it's like people have been considering it dead for a long time, and I don't really, I can't disagree with them, because we're basically seeing this transition into, which is Christianity pretty much giving up on Europeans and whites because they're just too hard to.
Well, it's the
And
it's the death
them,
it's the death of Eurocentric Christianity. That's how I see it.
it's and I don't necessarily blame Christianity for doing that, because white people are like a lot of trouble to keep interested in religion at the moment. But they've Christianity's embraced this policy of like, it doesn't matter the quality of the convert. All we're looking for is the amount of people who will be Christian.
Right, and you have the
And this,
Pope like kissing refugee feet. Like that's it's as popely as that might be. It's fucking degenerate, and we don't want that.
you're getting to this level of Christianity where it's basically all excellence, all requirements of excellence have been jettisoned, and you're getting this like this religion that only wants like warm bodies. It doesn't care about
Right.
anything else. And what this is going to cause is it's going to cause a break with Europeans, because once we start getting black popes, we're going to have to start getting black popes at one point. I mean, you can't have like the billions of people in Africa be Christians and then, or Catholics, and they want a pope, and they're not going to accept all these white popes consistently. So eventually, like,
Well, yeah, because
you're of like the race
all
of
these minorities see themselves as an in group. I wouldn't say before Christianity, but a lot of them do. A lot of the Baptists here in the southern United States actually see their racial group before their religion, and so they're more willing to accept black people who are atheists into their Baptist church rather than white Christians. This is something that I've seen pretty consistently where I live, where I have a white friend who is a Christian who tries to go to his local church, which just so happens to be Black Baptist, and they don't accept him because he's white. Even though they believe in sort of the similar things, he wants to join in, but they won't let him. So there's going to be, again, another ethnic divide within this religion.
I believe there's always already been ethnic divides, and you can look at things like the Protestant Reformation and the Orthodox Church, and it's like, well, Christianity is already divided ethnically, and it's like this idea of a universal religion, trying to project a universal religion across the whole world. Um, this results in my opinion, it results in two things: either the universal religion has a schism, or the people who are obeying the universal religion and disagree with its tenets because they just don't live that way. It causes pathology, and that's what I think Christianity has caused the Europeans for a very long time, which is a lot of pathology.
Oh, sure. I mean, the religious wars in Europe are one of the most awful things that have ever happened, which is why today we're trying to stop these brotherly wars, because we don't want to repeat those past transgressions, I guess. And that's the one criticism I have about certain fire and brimstone theists or Christians that I come across, is that even though we agree on politics and things like that, we're coming to the same conclusions, but they're attacking me because I see the source in a slightly different way. And it's like, well, you're putting your religion before your race, which I think is a mistake.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I get this kind of thing too, because like I find if you press a Christian hard enough, like if they take it seriously, because my thing is like a lot of Christians are sort of half serious about it, but if you get a serious Christian and you press them hard enough on topics, they'll start basically attacking their own race and saying like, "Oh, whites were barbarians. They were
Exactly.
useless before Christianity." They just get this. It's this pathology. It's this pathology that they get. It's the same kind of pathology you'd expect if you forced another people to adopt a religion that wasn't theirs, and they'd start hating themselves and wanting to be something else, which is where you get the phenomenon of like all these white peoples thinking they're Israelites or thinking they're Jews, and they're like, "Oh, I want to be a Jew. Christians are Jews," and it's like, no, you're not fucking Jews. Okay, you don't become Jew. Like, I mean, spiritually, you can become Semitic, but because you're a Christian, you don't become a Jew. Like, it doesn't happen. And I mean, I don't know. I just view like Christianity as being the root of a lot of problems. And atheism, I believe Christianity is the root of atheism. That's why I was bringing up it so literally earlier, has caused people to, you know, lose faith in things, because when you force something to be physically only real in a physical sense, and then you force like the Jesus myth is only real physically, it doesn't apply to everyone, it doesn't have this higher metaphysical purpose, and then you force them to think like, oh well, the world is sinful and horrible. It's atheism, and I think it's like a one-to-one evolution of Christianity is what I think atheism is.
Well, it's a reaction. When you take people who are generally rational in a lot of ways, and you show them things like that, these evangelists who are speaking in tongues, or the Pentecosts who are hitting people over the head with their jacket and they're falling down on the ground, or you see these like these like Catholic what's the
one of these videos, and they were basically doing like fake wrestling, like
Chris,
Christian fake wrestling, where
yeah, yeah.
the priest would like one guy was like twitching and like having a fake seizure, and then the priest did like this, basically jumped up, and then like when he landed, he threw both of his arms at the guy, and then the other guy like jumped backwards, like he got a
Yeah.
demon expelled from him.
Exorcism,
So
that's what I
like,
was looking for. Yeah, you see, like if you take people who are generally pretty rational, there might be a little spiritual, maybe a little religious, and then you expose them to things like that, and their reaction is to be drawn away from that. It's they're getting drawn to atheism or agnosticism because of it's like a reaction to this insanity that they're seeing from the literal interpreting of Christianity, I think.
I think there's always been crazy fucking problems with Christianity. I mean, we don't have to keep talking about this because it's not exactly about Christianity, but the thing is, like, the death of Christianity as I see it has basically been baked into the roots of it, of like this was an inevitable thing, it was unsustainable, and seeing it finally come full circle and result in its very strange end to a very strange religion.
Well, I wouldn't say that, and I would say it more has to do with the interpretation as it's changed over time. And this is sort of the problem with taking something literal like Christianity, is that there's many interpretations, and the Protestant interpretation as a reaction to the Catholic interpretation led to a lot of issues that we're seeing today. I have a theory. Well, it's not my theory; it's something I read, but if you read the suicide note analysis that I did, or watch the video, you'll see that there is sort of a direct line from Protestantism to egalitarianism. It seems to be a factor of that. Now, this is not us attacking Christianity. This is a brotherly critique of an ideology that has permeated the West. And if we want to, move forward, we have to be able to have these conversations. You know,
Well, this is what I see as in why I think Christianity is doomed. I mean, when you're looking at the very start of Christianity, I believe it was about the first 3,000 something Christians. They were all Jewish, and they all the apostles were Jewish, and they had to have a something called the Council of Jerusalem to decide that non-Jews could actually convert to Christianity without having to be Jewish first. And so they had to like actually go through a council, decide that non-Jews could be Christians, and all the saints for like the first 100 something 200 years were all martyrs. It was a religion, it was a communal religion, one where everything was supposed to be shared in common. Martyrdom religion, like all they had to make another category of saints after Christianity got in power and stopped getting martyred.
right? Well, I mean, it's fairly common amongst all religious groups that there's going to be martyrs and things like that. But yeah, I understand. And the whole like saints thing is also very interesting because it's literal pantheism as far as I can tell. Especially when you're in Italy and you look at the Catholics in Italy, if you ask them, if you have a problem and you pray to something, who's the first person you pray to? And like over half of them don't even pray to Christ as their first choice. They'll pray to a saint, and it's like,
Well,
that seems a little pantheist to me, guys.
you get weird stuff like the Orthodox apparently basically make up stories where the angels are more involved. So you basically get like the Orthodox having pseudo pagan stories where the angels are serving the part of like the minor gods.
Right. That's pretty
Like
much
you
what
get
they.
weird, you
That's
get
pretty
weird
much what they
stuff.
are. Like, I'm a big fan of the Archangel Michael. The saint of war. I don't know if that's exactly how it's described, but basically the guy that comes down and blesses you before you go into war. And it's like, man, that's pretty awesome. I'm down with that.
I think he's the saint of soldiers. I don't think he's like the saint of war.
I think
But
I thought it was war. It's something has to do with war.
might be. I don't think they go that direct and say that because that might be a little too. That sounds a little too non. I don't know. It could be.
There's a lot of non-Christian things in Christianity, man. Let me tell you.
A little bizarre. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I'm just saying when you're looking at, and then when you said the Protestantism earlier, I view Protestantism as just a more consistent reapplication of Christianity's core values. So when we're talking about like the religion was unsustainable, it's like, okay, well, either it was going to be adapted into something else, or if it stayed intellectually consistent and like true to itself, it was going to be unsustainable. And that's just how I view it. Is like reformed several times by crazy fuckers like Constantine, or you got like uh main. They reformed it. They made it more elitist, I guess. But like at the end of the day, I don't know. When you take Christianity at its core and you apply it to like Europeans, I'm not sure if it ever could have without getting like either viciously corrupted or just dying out. So
Hmm. Yeah, I see that. So when it comes to religious practices, what are some of the things that you do as far as religious practice is concerned? Do you feel comfortable sharing that?
yeah, I want to bring two more things up because
Sure.
I believe these are kind of interesting. When you look at Judaism and Islam or Mohammedanism, these two religions they have a basically you can't show depictions of like God or holy figures, right? But and that was a part of Christianity, I believe. But when you think of like the most famous depictions of Christian things, I mean the two that pop into my mind are the birth of Adam, you know, God almost touching Adam's hand, and the David, the statue of David. And those are probably the two most famous things I could think of like Christian depictions, and both of those would be considered idolatry, right?
Well, I
You're
think
depicting
I think
God.
humans have this innate need for iconography. I mean, it's present pretty much anywhere. I mean, whether it's Egyptian religion or even the most ancient primal like African fertility religions, there's a need for this iconography. And I think when you have these Semitic religions that suppress that, I think it's a bad thing. Which is why I think like Christianity in particular, when it became Eurocentric, it allowed for this iconography, this worship of idols, which I think is kind of important.
Well, that's the thing is saying like the very core of it, like some of the most beautiful things that Christianity has produced, and in my mind, some of the most famous are inherently like anti-Christian kind of. It's like it goes against the spirit of what they're preaching, and it shows like the European nature to make something beautiful, no matter the limitation. But I guess what I'm saying there is like I also have a theory about the not being able to depict God or anything in like in the Semitic religions. I think it causes them to actively despise beauty. Sure about that, but it's just a theory I've had because
Hmm.
the Jews and Muslims both just they don't seem to create anything that really has any
Uh,
mind.
I mean, I can't really think of anything inherently Judaic that they've created that was beautiful, but the Islamic world did have a lot of fairly pretty things before it really turned violent. But yeah, I see what you're saying though.
The question about what do I do practices? I mean, I do a couple of things. I do pray. I do libations a lot. Like in a libation is just you take a cup of wine, you dedicate it to the gods or the ancestors, and then you pour it out somewhere. It's something pretty much everyone did, but the Romans
You
they
gotta
used to
pour one
do it.
out for your homie, man.
Like a 40 of vodka, the cheapest one I could find at my latest drugstore. Yeah, I go to like the street with the crack whores, and I pour one out to the Thor and all the niggers that ain't here.
Shit, this is for my nigga Thor. Pour one out.
Exactly.
R.I.P. in peace.
Basically, the height of pagan religion there. Um,
What Thor in a do rag with a 40 in his hand?
exactly,
Eh,
exactly. When you think of like all the Norse gods, most of them would probably be considered black.
well, I mean, they were a little bit rapey, you know, especially the Roman and Greek pantheons. Little
We
bit
could
touchy
we could
feely.
we could get into that, but anyways, uh, no, I do like libations. I do pagan holidays. I mean, hell, I literally just got done not too long ago creating my holiday calendar of like all the holidays I want to celebrate for various people. One for basically all the Roman emperors, so I just called it Emperor's Day, but Julius Caesar, like all my favorite Roman emperors or Romans, so just stuff like that. Like I'll do there are several holy days and like feast days and stuff that are already established. So you can just look at like Roman holy festivals on Wikipedia and you can find a lot there. They're the famous Celtic holidays. There's about like 8 Celtic holidays that are famous. And well, I mean, we got like Halloween. you know, the winter, holiday, the Easter, like, we already celebrate most of the big pagan religions anyways. So,
Oh,
the
sure, yeah.
ones that I add on are just kind of, ancillary. They're not super important. They're just minor things that I like.
Are you familiar at all with the Maetics, the things that Varg Vikernes talks about, him and his wife, his take on European religion? Are you familiar with any of his works?
Edix? What does he call them?
Maetics? It's a fucking. But are you familiar with that or?
Post a link to that. I'm not sure if I am.
Well, I'll summarize it real quick, and I'll send you a link later if you want to see it. But of all of the disagreements I have with Varg, his take on sort of this pre-Christian European religion is very interesting because they analyze the stories that we know and the practices that we know of that have survived, and a lot of it is just it's sort of an analogy for real life biology, kind of. So a lot of these religious festivals, a lot of these religious practices have to do with things that are happening in real life. Like, so, for example, there's throughout the year you have this constant reminder of life and death and birth and surviving the winter, things like this. It's a naturalist approach to religion, I think, where the people of the past sort of tried to interpret real things like biology and birth and life and death and just applied it to the supernatural because they didn't really have an explanation for it. If anyone's not familiar with Vard Vikernes and his wife Marie Cachet on their views on pre-Christian European religion, it's very interesting. Not saying that I subscribe to any of that, but it is very interesting to watch and sort of look at the parallels that they bring up. But yeah, I'll send you a link later. I'll probably post a link in the description here.
I mean, I've heard of a lot of Varg's sometimes weird ideas. Um, Not necessarily opposed to them in every case. Like, some things I've heard him say, I find interesting. Other things I heard him say, I think are, like, I don't know. I think sometimes his wife. I think his wife is actually autistic. I think sometimes his wife's autism like gets to him, and he ends up thinking some dumb shit.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I'm not a Vargist. I think some of the things he says about religion and survivalism are kind of neat, but the rest of the stuff, like the sort of waiting for the collapse survivalism stuff, I'm not really down with that. He's also pretty apolitical, so yeah.
I guess I'd say myths are supposed to be interpreted on multiple different levels. Like, there are a lot of instances on basically things having like two or three different meanings. So it's like, if the tree that Odin hung off of, if he was hanging off Yggdrasil, and that whole myth is supposed to be like, it's like all of us spend 9 months in the womb, and
Yep, that's part of it.
if it's supposed to something like that, like, I find that actually pretty believable. But it's just like, it could be. That's the thing. But that's the thing with the pagan myths that I was talking about earlier, and what I was saying is a weakness of Christianity. It's like the myths are supposed to have meanings to different people. So it's like, even if I don't think going on, there's not an orthodoxy, and there shouldn't be for me to. I mean, unless shit gets ridiculous. But I mean, there's not really like an orthodoxy for me to say like, wrong and you're a heretic, you deserve to burn at the stake.
Right, because
So
naturally people have different opinions, and when it comes to something as absolute as the divine, if you're preaching a literal interpretation, you're going to come to blows with people, and that's something that we should generally try to avoid because religion is supposed to be a unifier of people rather than something that causes 100 years war or whatever.
well, just to clear things up for the audience who might be confused at this point, I believe there's a universal truth, that there's an objective truth and an objective reality, but people experience the world differently, and groups of people experience the world differently. I think of, you know, how the Japanese would call, well, it didn't have a distinction between blue and green, and it's like, okay, is that a physical difference? Is that a cultural difference? Who knows exactly why they didn't distinguish it. But the thing is, like, people will experience and see the world differently, and groups of people have different wants and desires. So when you're talking about the truth, and this is why I believe in multiple gods, it's, why I'm entheist is like there is one truth, and I believe this is a quote in the Rig Veda. It's like the truth is one, but the wise see it many different ways. Truth that manifests in many different things, and this is kind of how I perceive the gods. It's like there's one absolute source to everything. Itself is multiple gods that take on different personalities. This is what I'm
Hmm.
thinking of. I'm not like a relativist. I don't think. I mean, I was saying earlier, I believe in an exclusive group of gods. Believes in the fucking African fertility god, or the Aboriginal blue-tongued skink or something. Like I believe in a particular group of gods. Not every culture has like to it. I believe you have to operate on some level, like similar level to mine, for things to be like right and some worth to it. Culture, no matter what it is, has their own equally valid interpretation of God.
Right.
But I am saying that.
You know what's interesting is that the exploration of sort of this moral relativism, or relativism as you talked about it, within Christianity, there is actually a lot of relativism that goes on there. And people, I hear a lot of Christians say that they believe in an objective morality, but there really is, if you study their type of moral value system, it is relative. It's relative to their deity. So I think that it's important to understand that there may be some sort of objective moral reality or something like that. There is an objective truth out there, and that we should strive to achieve that.
Well, I guess. Well, I think what you're getting into. What do you mean by that? Like, there is. It is relative to their deity.
Well, if you look, okay, so there's, when you're looking at, I guess, meta ethics, there's two different schools. There's the cognitivist and the non-cognitivist. And cognitivist is just using reason to come to a conclusion about the foundation of morals. But then within that, you have moral realism, moral anti-realism, the oh god, I don't remember all of it. It's this huge branching tree, but basically, under the moral relativist side is actually the divine command theorist, in which that their God is the arbiter of these moral values. It doesn't exist objectively. It depends on the, I don't want to say opinions, but it depends on the actions of the God to define what is moral. There's no inherent morality in the universe. There's no inherent truth to the universe. It's all dependent or relative to what God says. That's a separate discussion, though, but that's what I was getting at.
I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, if you're interested, look up the divine command theory and look up the moral absolutists.
Well, I mean, I guess so. I mean, there's also other problems just in general of like the Christians have like a relevant theology, which means like the truth of the world has to be revealed through like God or his prophets. But what I believe and what I think most pagans would believe is kind of the you can observe truth in the physical world without it needing to be revealed. Revelation is always helpful, but it's not a necessary like thing. We don't need a Jesus, we don't need a prophet to come and tell us how the world is. And we can deduce like good from the world and bad
Would you
just
say,
from observing it. We don't need God.
right? So it's not only is it intuitive, but it's also definable, and you can explore it and things like that.
I believe that. I mean, what the weakness that I see in the Christian revelation, the idea of revelation, is that if you cannot have a universal truth that is not universally revealed. So with Christianity, the truth was not revealed to humanity for a long time. So that's the thing. It's like there's always been evident, and that anyone follows the truth, and that it doesn't matter if you've been told something or not, but you can just deduce it if you
Well, that's
consider it.
the interesting thing is that a lot of Christian theorists have actually said sort of similar to what you're saying, that before Christianity, if people were still following what was revealed even after they died, that they would still be allowed into heaven because it hadn't been revealed to them. So it's like you have the, like, let's say you have a group of people who don't know that Christianity exists, but they're still following Christian principles in some abstract way. They'll still be allowed in heaven. So that something
Yeah, it's
to think about.
I knew about that. It's supposed to be like which was pagans or something. But that's the thing. It's like, well, you don't have an objective system, then that is relative based on what people know. And the biggest argument for this is to just not teach people Christianity because that means most people get into heaven. So the
Right.
thing is like
Well, it's
Christianity
it's
kind of
still it's still
defeats
dependent on
itself.
your actions. It's like
There's a lot less like rules on you. Like it's much easier to get into heaven if you didn't know about Christianity than if you did, basically.
well, not really, because you still have to act out these Christian principles in a way. You still have to act within the moral framework of Christianity to get into heaven. But the only difference is that, like, let's say the only difference between you and a Christian is that you don't know that Christianity exists, but you live the same lives. Then you'll still get into heaven. But if you don't know Christianity and you act outside of the Christian moral principles, you won't be. So it's like, even if you
I
like, is
know
that,
about the
well, that argument that you use that says that, okay, well, we shouldn't reveal Christianity to anybody because they'll just get into heaven anyway. Well, it's not exactly true, because you still have to act within the Christian moral value system to get in.
that because I've heard people say that if you don't accept, well, maybe it's different, but I don't know. I've heard different things based on different Christians, so
Oh, sure, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not sure.
I'm
Like,
telling you what I've read from Christian scholars. Basically, it's sort of a, not every Christian knows about what Christian scholars said about certain things, but it seems to be when they do hear about it, they tend to agree. So, and this is the other thing. It's like,
mm,
I have to defend Christianity sometimes, especially against the fucking fedora tippers. But you know,
Christianity, you know, from dumb arguments because at the end of the day, like, well, that I guess we can get into this problem now. Like, the normal person doesn't really have anything else. Like, paganism is not really a viable option for
oh sure,
really fucking crazy happens. Like, people aren't going to start being pagan. Like, we might get like some loot dictator comes into power, and for whatever reason he's a pagan and he starts building like great pagan churches, and we might get some weird ass shit like that happen that kind of happened in Nazi Germany. But I mean, any other normal context, paganism is pretty much gone from the Western tradition, at least
oh sure. And
for a
this is
while.
something I agree with Christians on, is that paganism is not something that I'm trying to revive per se. I'm not going to convert people. It's just like, hey, some of the cultural traditions of the past are worth exploring, some of the ideas. If you want to be a Christian, great. We can still live side by side. Just don't go around, burning crosses and saying that you're going to send me to jail for being a non-Christian. It's like we should all kind of come together.
Another thing that might get taken in the other direction too much of, like, we're not looking to revive paganism. I mean, the thing is, like, it's not unrevivable, I don't think, because there are
Sure.
actually quite a few European countries who, I'm thinking of Iceland, I think Lithuania, there might be a few Slavic countries who actually have a pagan population in the 1% or above. So
Well,
1% of them
sure.
are actually pagan, and that I didn't know that. So that's actually quite a few people. That's more people than I thought
Well, there are
that
many
identify as pagan.
pagan traditions that are still celebrated in Western and Eastern Europe. They don't really think of it as pagan. They just think of it as something cultural that they do. I think of in Sweden, they erect that big, it's like a telephone pole kind of, with some rings on it, and then they dance in a circle around it. That's
It's
sort of,
called a fairy pole.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
fairy.
Yeah, yeah. So stuff like that still happens. I don't think it's unrevivable. It's not a goal of me to revive it. And I think that it would be more important to work together and sort of like try and save Christianity in some aspects, because the alternative is people like Marcus turning to Islam, and we don't want people turning to Islam.
That's kind of the thing. Is like when you're considering Christianity if you'd ask the question, am I hostile to Christianity? I'd say this was the past. If this was like the year 400 and I could fight Christianity and like fight with the pagans, I would. But we're looking at a time where basically Westerners only have one religious tradition. They don't have anything else. There's probably no hope anytime soon of them transitioning to anything else. basically have a fucking mess on your hands, because it's like, well, what can you do? I mean, on
Well,
one hand, you got atheism, which is a monster. You got Christianity, which is basically a dying, you know, sickly, dying, vastly degraded religion. There's really no good answer here.
well, I would say that, yeah, I defend Christianity a lot because I think the Western world has a long tradition of Christian values, and I think it has sort of, in a good sense, it's been a curse and a blessing. It's given us good things and it's given us bad things, and I think it's more important to save that. I mean, because you look at some of these pagans who are like, oh ho ho, Christ on a stick, you're a Christ cuck and all this. Like, come on, man, that's not fucking helpful. Like, I mean, you're still putting your religion before your race. So how can you call yourself an ethno-nationalist? But secondly, it's like you have over 1,000 years of people, your ancestors, still your ancestors, that if you say you want to honor your ancestors, well, which ones are you honoring? You know, is it, oh, it's only the pagan ones? Oh, well, it's only the Christian ones. It's like, there's some criticism that I can lay upon people here.
To agree more of like, I don't know. Well, the thing with Christianity is like it doesn't have as much history as some people would like to claim. I mean,
Well, it's only because it came in a time when we developed writing, and so a lot of it has been saved, and it's also more recent. It's
just
also it's the only thing that's been taught for a long time as well.
what I'm trying to say is like about like Christianity having a lot of history. I would say it has a lot of history in some parts of Europe, but if you're talking about some northern parts of Europe, or like especially places like Iceland or even America, I'm not really sure about that, because, well, in the case of Iceland or like Lithuania, they only have maybe, a couple hundred years at most of Christianity, and these are also the most pagan nations, funnily enough, still. But when you're talking about like America, you've basically just had this atheistic nation forever. I don't know. Like the thing is, like, can we? I don't think we've ever really had like a respectable form of Christianity here. To me,
Well,
America always seems to have had this weird form of Christianity that I don't like too much.
yeah, I mean, it started out a lot of puritanical Christians left and came to America, and then we got a lot more, normal Protestants that came here once things kind of settled down. So, and also America is the birthplace, same as Australia, is the birthplace of a lot of evangelical religions, like a lot of literal
That's
interpretations. So, I see what
that's what
you're
I'm
getting
saying.
at.
Is like when I see America, it's like we've always kind of had really bizarre and unpleasant versions of Christianity. So to me, it's like when I'm talking to like a traditionalist, like fucking Catholic or something, they're like, "Oh, we have to make everyone Catholic," and I'm like, "Dude, you're talking about places that have like hundreds and hundreds of years of not being fucking Catholic." So it's like, "Oh, we got to change all this around. We got to get all this done." It's like, okay, you're talking about tradition so much. It's like, okay, you're here. So that's kind of the thing, is like, and especially now in America, it's like,
Oh, you cut out.
like deep in spiritual, like, I don't know. When we're getting to places like this, not really sure what we can do. And I guess I'd ask you the question of where do we really go from here? Because we know that paganism, unless something crazy happens or unless it's given a long time, isn't coming back. It seems to be on the outs. So what do you think is going to happen here? What needs to happen?
Oh, well, I would be in favor of people, maybe people who are already more comfortable with Christianity, like sort of like the masses. Like, there's a difference between the masses and the intelligentsia, something like that.
Yeah.
I'd be in favor of the masses returning to Christianity, as sort of a way to unify people. I just don't want it to be antagonistic to other European faiths. You know what I mean? I wish we could work together. Like, let's say we get the ethno state, or we save Europe from the foreign invasion like that, and it'd be nice if there was more spirituality in a Christian sense. But I'd want to be a part of a sort of well, think of it as in the Third Reich. It was a Christian nation, but they still celebrated and studied a lot of pre-Christian religions and sort of revived a lot of that. And it has to do a lot with the Romantic period that preceded them. But it'd be nice if we could have an environment in which there was a stable religion that sort of permeated the masses, but it was also not not illegal to study sort of the more esoteric religions. I'd like to be a part of a society that could study that, the more esoteric religions, without being persecuted. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think part of the reason why Christianity, I think there's a lot of reasons for why Christianity is in decline. I think part of it is that when we get like the martyr and kind of the martyrdom and the limitations on priests and nuns, basically the most religious people in the society. So martyrs die because they're martyrs, and then the priests and nuns obviously don't have kids. Situation where Christianity is kind of cleansing itself, and
Well, that was my only criticism of Christianity in the medieval period, is that they took the best, some of the best and brightest from society, sort of the people who could read and write. And yeah, it's good that they preserved a lot of text, but they also didn't allow these people to have children. So it's like they never got a chance to pass on those intelligent genes. So there
oh,
was a bit of a decline.
it's not that they're taking the best. Because I don't know if I'd call the monks like the absolute best,
Well,
but
I
what
wouldn't either, but they're one of the few people in that time period who could read and write.
but what they were doing is killing off the most religious people in the society, and if you do that for long enough, and if you guys don't know, rabbis and imams, they don't have this problem. They're the most valuable. They have the most kids in their
Yeah,
fucking communities.
they're taking on, like 6 wives and having like 20 children. So it's like,
Every Jewish yenta, wants the rabbi's son is like, their husband. So that's the thing. Is like, these other communities, they don't have this fucking problem. And whites, for whatever reason, Europeans, somehow they've lucked into this horrible position where priests don't get to have kids. And yeah, I'm sure you're whatever sect you're part of probably does let you have kids, but for the most part, Christians haven't been having kids. I mean, the real most religious Christians, and you take hundreds and hundreds, thousands or something, years of that. It eventually does a number on the population, and I think we basically have culled a lot of those very religious genes out of people. It's the same effect you can see now with the leftists not having a lot of kids, and guess what? The
yep.
population's getting more conservative, and that's I think basically that's what happened to Christianity. Is Christianity played itself and ended up doing permanent damage to itself.
That's a good theory. I like to hear that. So let's go ahead and wrap things up here. We're getting on to an hour. Are there any recommended reading material that you'd like to give to people? Anything that you can recommend if people are interested in non-Christian European religion?
Hey, look, I'll post something in the comments for a link to a pagan Discord server that I'm on, and if any of you want to, go on my server and talk with me about this, I'll post a link to that too. Well, I won't post a link to that because that server has some sensitive material on there. But if you want to join, I'll send you a message. But the thing is, like, if you're interested in learning more about paganism, uh, there's a lot of different books. You could read something like Summoning the Gods by I think it's Aaron Clary, or I mean, there's a lot of books that go into the culture or the mindset. Give you book lists for that. Hell, I might even send you some pictures of book lists. If you're talking about learning about the actual religion, I'd recommend is one, just reading the sources. You could, yeah, I mean, any pagan book. You could do the Poetic Edda, the Bhagavad Gita, the Odyssey. A lot of these books are classics anyway, so you should be reading them. But things that the actual classical myths and the real important text of
Yep, you gotta look at the
uh,
founding text of whatever sect that may be. That's also important.
the text aren't. It's not exactly founding. It's kind of the other way around, where the belief founded the text. It's not like Christianity, where
Well,
you have
sure,
like
but
a founding text.
you
But
should still read it.
thing I would recommend for people who are interested in pagan stuff is this guy called Dharma Nation.
Mm.
Let me send you the link right now. But Dharma Nation he's a Hindu, but he calls himself a part of this thing called Sanatana Dharma, which is it's a more correct version for Hinduism. And he's like a Hindu, like a sage. who gives lectures on. Well, he has a temple somewhere in the United States. I forget which state, but he uploads YouTube videos of the lectures that he gives, and a lot of his stuff, I pretty much people who've spoken on like paganism. I agree with him probably the most. Not everything this guy says I agree with. I find him very motivating and inspiring and knowledgeable.
Hmm.
He's done a stream with Survive the Jive. There are a lot of
Oh.
pagan YouTubers like Survive the Jive, but he's done a stream with Survive the Jive where both of them said that they consider uh, each other a part of sister religions. That basically the religions are nearly identical.
Oh, sure.
So what he believes in, he considers what I believe in a sister religion of his. Survive the Jive believes in. So this guy is very similar to me.
Well,
I sent you the link of Darmination.
all right. Well, I'll post it in the video description. Thanks everybody for watching. Please leave your angry Christian comments down below, telling us why we're wrong and that we're going to burn in hell. Thank you very much. Croc, any last words before we get roasted in hellfire?
You know what? I actually will make a quick statement about hell. Um, there's not really, I don't believe so anyways. There's not really such a thing as hell. I think when you do die, you can go to a version of hell, temporary, just based on the bad things you've done in your life. If you've been too materialistic, for example, you'd probably
Helheim.
suffer afterwards. Well, the thing is, think of sin as in like punching a brick wall. That's kind of like my version of sin. It's like God doesn't punish you for sin, you're punishing yourself, because it's like when you punch a brick wall, you break your fist, and it's like, well, God didn't do that. That's just a natural outcome of the sin you committed. But anyways, so we don't have a hell, really, not a permanent one. So I don't think I'll be burning in that for long. It's been interesting talking with you. If you ever want to do another talk or do like a panel where we have like religious people on here of different persuasions, I'd be
Right.
interested in that.
Yeah. I'm sure we can get something like that set up. I'm sure someone like maybe Swishy or Tommy would love to get in on that. If there's anyone in the chat here on the video who would like to get in on that, let me know. We'll set something up. But anyway, that's about all. Thanks for watching.